I'm no longer really calling myself just an embodiment teacher. So we'll see what that's all about. Probably trigger some people. We are simultaneously in material heaven, but psycho-spiritual hell. People have become brutalized by the machine. And what they want and what is happening is this is our year in review, what has happened in the last year in the embodiment world, generally in the company. We're going to also look at a radical departure. I'm no longer really calling myself just an embodiment teacher. So we'll see what that's all about. Probably trigger some people. But first, Helen, welcome.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
I've really enjoyed our podcast this year, whether that be just your wonderful yin, empathic, bringing out the best in me with love and attention, um, or also your expertise, like the stuff on autism and ADHD has been really popular. So, first of all, as you're the first one here, Helen, thank you for bringing the yin to my yang on this podcast this year.
You are very welcome. I have enjoyed them too. I think they've been great. They've been interesting. They've been fun. Yeah, it's been really good.
I think we complement each other in type, and we have sort of very lot of shared values and a crossover in practices, but also some differences in our personalities and our perspectives. And I think it sort of works, doesn't it? It
Yeah.
brings balance to the force.
Yeah, it does. It does.
Mm.
You've got to have differences as well, haven't you?
Yeah, it's not interesting otherwise. And I think the other big thank you for people up front is also our listeners. So just before we talk about the company and the courses and the embodiment world more generally, thank you to all our listeners. We passed 3 million downloads, which was completely mental. I don't quite how the boffins work it out, but it's across different platforms. We're actually considered a medium-sized podcast. So we're actually, because we've actually had over 700 episodes, if you work it out, that's not actually that many downloads per episode, but it's enough. It's enough to make it feel like we're not wasting our time. And I know people are listening regularly. Keck students say they found us here, so business wise, it's worth it. But from my point of view, the biggest thing is always just learning. Like I get to talk to cool people, and it's sort of like having homework due for me.
Yes.
It's like if I see I had this men's work guy last week on the podcast, right? And I was like, I read his book, listened to all his, I learned like a bunch of stuff about men's work. And I like did about 10, I do about 5 to 10 hours of research per guest. And it's actually one reason me and you are doing them is because it's less research time. We also listeners were saying like we'd actually like to hear your views, Mark, not just guests. And
Yeah.
I was like, oh, okay, yeah, that's fair enough, given I've been doing this for a while. So yeah, but I like that combination of me and you sort of talking about mostly my stuff, but and also some of your stuff and where it crosses over, but also the guests where I have to research them. And I thank you for listeners for all the shares as well. That's the thing. If you really want to help us out, is just send it. It's quite the podcast market is very crowded. And apparently, even
Mm.
sort of we're more or less sort of holding even on downloads the last year. And apparently, that's good because there's so many more podcasts that effectively it means we're getting a bigger share, as it were. So
Yes.
and it's just people don't find these things organically. So if you love a podcast, send it to a friend. That is the key thing. And apparently, like the star ratings and reviews on Apple and Spotify help. So, take a
Leave
minute.
reviews.
Uh, okay, we got a few nasty ones on there as well. A few people that don't like us who get triggered, and it's like, unfortunately, like a couple of one-star reviews can really drag the ratings down. So
Mm.
appreciate anyone who has, yeah, given us a review. So thanks for that. Cool. So the main thing we've been up to in the company, as people probably know, is not the podcast. So the podcast is a nice side project. It's for fun. It's for learning. It's a little bit of light marketing, but mostly it's really just for learning. So the main thing we do is a certificate of embodiment coaching. And this year's the first year we run it twice because it's 6 months long. So we thought we could run it twice. And first of all, I just say I'm proud of the quality of the course. Right. And especially doing it twice in a year, we get better every year. Like every time
Yeah.
gets a little bit, 5% better every time. And I'm genuinely proud of the quality of that course in a world of sort of throw things out and quick fixes and, new gurus making something. I mean, essentially it's like 20 years work because it came from EFC, the Embodied Facilitator Course, which we did in the UK before the war in Russia. And that was like the sort of founding of it in person. And then we started doing stuff online. And then when COVID hit, we go, okay, let's go more online. So that's been, and now I think we're on our sort of sixth. or seventh Keck online. Whether or not we will run it twice next year, I'm not sure. We're definitely running it starting again in February. I think there's even going to be a crossover month, Helen, where there's two Kecks running simultaneously. You're gonna murder me. Like that was a terror. I think we had like a month off for Christmas, and it meant there's a crossover month. Which I mean, luckily we've got some very good people in charge. Alina and Caro. Caro from Colombia is helping Alina. The two of them, well, they're both managers. They're helping each other. So this means Alina can have babies and Caro can do childcare. It works. It works. It's a very human setup, and the two of them are brilliant and very. Caro's great. Like she's got that Colombian passion, but she's also got like she's from business world and got very good organization. And we always joke Alina is the German in charge that organizes things. And without their organization, I'd be absolute chaos. I mean, you're the other person who organizes me, Helen. You tell me every Sunday night what I'm teaching this week on our various courses, and I'm like, okay, right, what's going on? There's all these different things happening. People think we've got like a big office with loads of people, and we just don't. We're just like a really little company. Like the entire team is like Steve and Leela. That's like marketing and emails, and Virginia in customer support. Brian, who's not even full time doing tech support, me and you. That's pretty much it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Like this is Vish, my PA, 20 hours or 15 hours a week. Mm,
Yeah, people don't realize the power of a little team. They think there's loads of people behind the scenes.
I think we punch above our weight in terms of like a YouTube channel, that's going well. Talk about the young men stuff in a bit, but there's sort of two YouTube channels actually, one for kind of embodiment, one for young guys. And then the Instagram, again, we got two of those, one for the company and then my personal one. I'm going to talk about the changes I'm making to that in a minute. Like we do a lot, podcasts, YouTube. You do the Facebook group. How's that going?
Yeah, it carries on. It's a lovely place to be. We don't have any major fallouts usually.
Well, we'll see with the new direction. I just showed Lucia, my girlfriend, the new direction. She was like, "Well, Mark, this is true, but it's going to upset people." So we'll talk about that in a minute. I'll try not to create too much chaos in your harmonious, pleasant Facebook group. But I've had to say things too soon. There's an interesting thing about everyone is either bleeding edge, leading edge, or trailing edge. And
Yes.
I'm a little bit bleeding edge sometimes. I'm not as bleeding edge as Kanye. Kanye's always the one who sees things coming too soon, and then he's crazy and he's borderline mentally unwell because he's so leading edge. But I don't always agree with him, by the way. But it's been pointed out that he's like the predictor of culture. He's like the cultural canary, like the
Yeah.
canary in the coal mine. And I'm probably a little bit too soon on things. And the people I see really like cashing in are the people who just do what I was doing a few years ago. And they often, like, for example, on the Instagrams, lots of like good Instagrammers, and they just do really, we jokingly call it basic bitch tips, BBT. And I think, God, if I was just more basic and doing things that are a bit less innovative, and it's just very simple stuff that tends to do well on the socials, and
Yeah.
done consistently with good design, let's give credit to people. And I sometimes think, God, if I just dumbed everything down, but it's not kind of really in my nature. I mean, we do the nervous system stuff, and part of our facilitators flourishing group, that's a big part of it, isn't it? Is the nervous system.
Yes. Yeah.
And you're one of the best teachers of polyvagal theory I've ever seen. So if people haven't seen the free content, the episodes, or the YouTube videos of you teaching polyvagal theory, and bear in mind, I've met and interviewed Deb Stader and Stephen Porges multiple times. But sometimes the people who come up with things aren't always the best communicators. So Debs is good actually, and Stephen's lovely, but he's maybe not. He's not the most accessible teacher. Something. He's a scientist. That's his
Yes. Yeah.
talent. To no disrespect to him. Yeah, so the facilitators flourishing has been the other thing, hasn't it? Which has been new this year. And facilitators in flow is what it became because unfortunately someone else had the name and I didn't Google it. So flourishing facilitators, someone else was already using it. I actually knew them and I had to apologize to them. They took it very well, and then we changed the name to facilitators in flow, which is basically like the membership for facilitators. What purpose do you think it serves? It's not really a course like Keck. What would you say is the main purpose of it?
Well, it's support, it's connection, it's nourishment, it's re-examining things without having to go into student mode, but still there's some learning within it. It gets people to reconsider things, look back, go reconsider how they're going to take things forward, but also look after themselves.
Yeah, I think burnout prevention is a big part of it. I think a
Mm.
lot of coaches and facilitators feel, isolated and burnt out. I mean, it's the sort of condition of modernity in many ways. I'm going to come to my theses on this recently, which is my new work. But because of this, they need a bit of support and a bit, ongoing learning is often a thing with
Yes.
us. I'll say us because I think of myself as part of that group, and my own sort of recovery from burnout. Personally living in the Balkans, part of that has been, living by the ocean, living by the river. Part of that has been recovery from burnout. And you've seen me on that
Yes.
journey over the last few years and been super helpful. I mean, so Keck is our main thing. That's been going great. You know, it's quite hard to make a living from at the moment. I would say and this is the industry. I don't take this personally at all because I have a lot of friends who are competitors in a friendly way, and we all talk kind of behind the scenes. And it just is a rough time right now in the industry that there's a lot of it's called red waters in business terms. There's just a lot of competition. Like there's a lot we discovered this year, like a whole bunch of new embodiment coach trainings that were made by sort of no offense, but sort of young girls in Bali and people with not much experience. And I don't want to take the piss too much because that was me 10, 15 years ago.
Yeah.
Well, maybe 20 years ago now, but I was the young guy who was coming up. And now I've kind of become the establishment, which is a really weird feeling. And there's lots of kind of and people are doing cool, innovative stuff quite often. Obviously not as experienced as us. Basically, with Wendy Palmer's death, Paul Linden's semi-retirement, and Strozzi's more or less retired now, though he has, other people in Strozzi Institute. We're kind of like the kind of global, I'd say the global lead provider, along with probably the Strozzi Institute of embodiment coach training.
Yes.
And I've,
Yeah.
and I've discovered a few other people out there who are good, and a few other. I don't want to sort of badmouth everyone. There's some people who are genuinely doing good work that I've had on the podcast. I'm not scared to promote them. I'm not scared to talk with them,
Yeah.
publicly, because I think different styles do suit different customers and students, so that's okay. Like I always say, I'm not everyone's cup of tea. And we had someone very early in Keck this year get super offended and try and make a complaint about us, and it was like, look, you just should have done your homework better. Just look at, we're out there. We're not lying. It's authentic, like look us up. There's plenty of other people out there if you want to go super woke or super sensitive. You know what I mean?
Yeah. You've got
Plenty
to
of
know
other
who your teachers
providers.
are. Yeah. You've got to know who they are, haven't you? Who you're signing up with.
And we always say, like, yes, there's different teachers on Keck. They do have different styles, different cultural backgrounds,
Mm.
different genders. That's part of Keck. So you can do classes with Christina or Ranko or Flower. But there is also a kind of company culture, I would say, of having a sense of humor. I think it's that mixture of very practical with a sense of humor.
Yes.
That's our kind of brand, I would say. It's what we do well. Um, yeah, but it is very crowded right now. It is, AI is causing some issues. I think a lot of coaching is going to be replaced by AI in the same way as I see a lot. Apparently, therapy is one of the biggest uses for AI, and we've done episodes on this, stuff that we've talked about quite a lot. I think embodiment has some immunity to it, but I think every coach listening to this needs to ask, what can you do that AI can't?
Yeah.
And I'd also just say have some humility.
Yes.
I like you've got a medical background, and just yesterday, right? Like someone in my family, they had an eye scan of one of their children, and there was a scar on the eye, and they wanted to know what it was, and they couldn't get an NHS appointment, and they couldn't talk to an expert. So I just stuck it through ChatGPT, and it said, "Look, it's probably this." And I know a little bit about the topic because I had a similar issue, and I thought, yeah, that makes sense. And we'll check it out, obviously, with an optometrist and blah blah blah. But it's like, okay, so that has already given probably more accurate and certainly quicker and cheaper information than a private doctor. And I just thought, and I hear doctors say, "Oh, I won't be replaced." And it's like, well, if you're just giving information, same with coaches, if you're just doing information, techniques, of course you will.
It might take some of the strain off NHS, the National Health Service in the UK, if people leave their questions to AI and they go to the doctor for medical people that they need a proper review for, you know?
Well, the interesting thing is doctors will be reviewing. Yes, there may always be a place for that.
Yeah.
But interestingly, the nurses that actually do the injections and things are kind of less likely to be made unemployed. And I was talking to a friend who's a palliative care doctor, and he says, well, ironically, the human side is now the side that's less replaceable. Like my niece has decided she wants to be a midwife. And I just thought, great career choice.
Yes.
Like who wants a robot touching them there kind of thing. So despite the population decline, that is a great career choice in the face of AI,
Yeah.
because it's very human. People want that human touch, and I see the same. A lot of young people realizing this, but accountants and lawyers and other people not cottoning on, just arrogantly saying they can't be replaced. And I'm like, why would I pay £200 to talk to an accountant or lawyer when I can do this for free? And then just check with the accountant or lawyer, maybe, say, hey, is this
Yeah.
up to date? Or because obviously there's, you've got to be careful with the hallucinations. But yeah, certainly coaching and therapy, I think that's coming in. And I think the key line is when live video becomes a thing. And that I just spoke to my friend who works for one of the big boys in Silicon Valley just this morning, and he says that already exists, but it's too expensive right now. But
Wow.
yeah, yeah, I was shocked. I said, "Well, when's this coming?" And he said, "Oh no, it exists." So like, what that means is you could flip open your phone, and instead of it being text, which is not that satisfying, instead of chatting to ChatGPT, you could talk to ChatGPT, and the video is now good enough that it's not in the uncanny valley, that it looks real. Like I've been fooled by AI pictures a few times and
Yes.
videos.
Yeah.
It's getting better. And
Yeah.
I would guess 2 to 3 years. And he says, "Oh, that's such a long time away," because it's already out there. Apparently, he says it's just right now. It's just very expensive to run, so it's not yet publicly in the same way that other things are. But as soon as that happens, a lot of coaches and therapists have got a problem. If they're not
Yes.
touching people, if they're not embodied, if presence isn't the key part of their offer, it's obviously going to create this trust crisis. Yeah, and it's interesting. Like we use it in terms of like doing like when we do a podcast, right? We'll stick things through chat. You're good at it, aren't you? You know quite a lot about it. What do you want to add to what I'm saying here?
I mean, I love it. I love it in the right hands. I love it used ethically. I love it used as a
Yeah.
tool. But I think you're right. As things stand at the moment, even if, well, it's hard to imagine it replacing a human, even in a video, even if it's good, because there's a feel even through the camera, even through the screen. There's something that you feel, something I feel. And I was thinking about psychiatry. I could feel things in the room. AI can't feel things in the room yet.
Yeah, there's an
Anyway,
embodied intuitive element.
yeah, yeah.
And
So
I
yeah,
said to my friend about art, my friend's involved with AI art, and I said, I've never seen any AI art. I've just seen trash. And he was telling me it does exist. I've just seen the slop and not the good stuff. And I'm like, well, does it lack that defined spark? And he laughed and said, "Oh, are you going back to the Middle Ages?" And I said, "Yes, exactly." And and he was like really shocked, and we'll come to why. Um, this is the kind of new direction in a way. Before we get there, though, other things this year. So celebrating the Keck students, the Keck course, celebrating the facilitators in flow. My mentee group has been very satisfying. Obviously, you're involved with that. Post Keck, shout out to Tad Hargreave, who does some marketing stuff with us, marketing for hippies, Tad. Yeah, the mentee group's great, and I've had some of them stay at my house. One from Czechia came to live with me for a few days. Obviously the ones in Slovenia I've met up with and hung out with, but I like the MEC students as the masters of embodiment coaching. They're the people who do Keck 6 months, and some people decide they want to do sort of 2 years of study. And sometimes I feel like they're my real students. I don't want to insult the Keck people because they get good tools and they learn a lot in 6 months, like a lot in 6 months. I sometimes feel like we over deliver and then we give them too much and they don't want to be customers again because they've already got enough to digest for the rest of their lives. Um,
but it's
it's like
hard
the
to
book, The Body
digest
and
that
Coach.
without the support.
It's a
It's and
lot,
it's
isn't the Mech students are the ones who get to digest it and then we add to it some other stuff, like the toolkit course. I think we released the toolkit book this year as well. If people haven't
we
seen that,
did.
26 embodiment poses. That's apparently selling reasonably well on Amazon. Just got a trickle through of sales, Steve tells me, which is nice. It's embodied toolkit and 26. I think the 26 poses is very concrete. So people like that. And then, of course, with a bit of help, someone wrote the book "How to Become Human," a book by Mark. I don't know who the author was, but it just says by Mark. So some what implausible deniability they call it. Yeah. So that's the book for young men, and I'm halfway through my young men's mental health and meaning training at the moment. I'm doing a training for a group about 20 young men, mostly European, online. That's going really well. really satisfied with Ranko and Danny. That is really satisfying, and it feels like I'm teaching the people that I was when I was a young man. Like I've become the older man I needed while I was a young man. And I think that's what we all do if we're in middle age, you become who you needed when you were younger. If
Yes.
you're really fulfilling your life's work, you become the
Yes.
mentor. I feel like I've got middle age this year. And sort of in bad ways, like I literally have an arthritis diagnosis now, Helen. Oh my God. It's not too painful yet, but it's a bit like, really? How old am I? Or like all that martial arts when I was younger is probably coming home to roost.
Yep.
But anyway, so I feel like I've hit middle age this year, steady relationship. The business is sort of steady, a few little health issues, nothing too serious. I've got past the sort of burnout of a few years ago. I was pretending I was young while actually hitting middle age. And now I've sort of, I don't, how does it feel to you? It feels like I've sort of settled into it this year.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely. I mean, it was coming, wasn't it? But you've settled in. You've arrived.
Settled into it, yeah. I feel like more sustainable working patterns and not so workaholic and obviously big personal changes for me, like living in the Balkans and deciding, still really torn about whether to settle back in the UK. The UK's got a lot of problems right now, and but I've got family there, and
Yeah.
there's no tribe is really important. And
Yes.
the deep ease and familiarity of home, the land, the culture, like I really miss that. So it's really interesting what it's made me realize about co-regulation. And I think this really segues into some of the kind of newer work. Is that I remember Ranko saying, laughing at me, saying like you were picking countries like a consumer picks products.
Yeah.
Because it's like on the surface, like Croatia, it's like good tax and nice weather, nice weather and they're beautiful. And it's true, I love these countries. Croatia and Slovenia. I'm living in Istria, which is the Italian-speaking part of Croatia, next to Slovenia. So basically, it's one region I've been living in. They're different, but they've got some similarities. And they're very beautiful and they've got lots of advantages and the people are nice and there's lots of positive things here. The weather's a bit nicer than England. I had the longest summer of my life this year living by the river in Ljubljana, which is such a romantic town. Just living next to the river with Lucia was just one of the most easeful. I started painting Warhammer miniatures again, like my old childhood hobby. It was just like this romantic, relaxing few months by the river, and now I live by the coast. It's wonderful. It's romantic. It's beautiful. But I also really miss home. I
Yes.
really miss the UK where I grew up, and I guess what I've been really kind of coming back to is integrating some of the conservative truths into psychology, into my own life and into my work. And I kind of want listeners to sort of take a deep breath at this point, because potentially people are going to get triggered by what's coming up. And we've sort of been leaning this way on the podcast, and we've both got our own take on it. It's slightly different people in the company. And just want to be clear, this isn't about the culture wars. So we're moving beyond the normal news cycle, left, right, pro this, against that, shouty social media. We're not in that. We're not talking about it. It's not like I've just suddenly decided, right wing stuff, blah, blah, blah. It's more like I've looked at the deep truths of traditionalism. And this is most of human history and culture. So it's both the sort of pagan animism and we could say Christian pre-modernity. So what most people don't realize is we live in a cult. So that is the cult of modernity. Why is it a cult? Because it has all the features of a cult, right? You could chat GPT features of a cult now, Helen, if you wanted, and we'll go through them. So it has a set of unquestioned assumptions, it has a set of dogma, it has a belief system, but it says it's not a cult. So the key thing about, let's call it secular materialist modernity, which really started in the Enlightenment, which is a great PR spin of a name, saying, and also the idea of progress. Like I had someone say to me, you want to go backwards? And I was like, you think that's bad, don't you? Backwards equals bad, forwards and backwards. This is actually an old Christian idea that's been sort of recycled by the Enlightenment to think of life always as progress. And I think that sort of myth of progress has hit a stumbling block of late. Like we've seen that modernity is failing, let's say, psycho spiritually. So modernity, so the period is both, if I say liberality, I don't mean left-leaning, or I mean modernity. So the period since the sort of 17th century has made us materialistically very successful. So we have iPhones, and you're listening to this on the internet, and we have cappuccinos, and life is wonderful, right? But man doesn't live off bread alone. Life is not wonderful. So we are simultaneously in material heaven, but psycho-spiritual hell. And I'm using quite strong language, but we are literally the most insane, addicted culture, as far as we can tell, that's ever lived. Well, this is difficult to measure, but as far as we can tell. And there's a sort of psychological, I sometimes call this the psychological apocalypse, that we've hit a kind of breaking point psychologically as a result of the cult of modernity. Um, these assumptions that meaning isn't real. And, I was doing all this meaning work with young men, and then I realized, like, oh, this is countercultural because the mainstream materialistic culture says meaning isn't real. And what does that leave? Nihilism. What does that create? It creates hedonism because you go, well, I might as well just have fun. So even say talking to Anna Lemke from Dopamine Nation on the podcast, she was like, well, if you pursue pleasure, you'll just end up in hell. You'll end up in pain. And I was like, oh, yeah, that's addiction. As someone who's in long-term sobriety, that totally makes sense. And if you look at what the solution of AA is for Alcoholics Anonymous, it's community, spirituality, right, and meaning. It's not more materialism. It's not more There's a little bit of psychology, a little bit like CBT type stuff, and they're not against a bit of mindfulness, so those things are all fine. But from the paradigm of materialistic psychology, which is there's no meaning, there's no spirituality, you're a lone individual. So that's the materialist, consumerist sort of in a way, it's almost sacred in like, what are the taboos of materialism? What are the taboos of the secular modernity? What does AI say are some of the cult-like features of modernity?
Absolute truth claims,
Okay, so the,
charisma. Go on.
let's do one at a time. So there's a metaphysical assumption of the absolute truth that materiality is all that exists, which is obviously untrue when we open our eyes and are conscious. It's obviously untrue if we recognize that, I don't know, hurting children is bad. So if we look at morality, and some things are beautiful. Okay, so we immediately can tell in our common sense experience that that metaphysical assumption is bullshit, but it's presented as an absolute truth claim, and actually you're pathologized if you don't go along with it, which is cult-like. What was the next one? Charismatic leaders.
Yeah, or unquestionable
Yeah,
authority.
so the unquestionable authority of science, right? This is where every podcast says Harvard neuroscientist. Yeah, trust the science. They're always pulling Bill Nye out and Neil deGrasse Tyson, these kind of weird, like materialist guys that actually don't have any way of explaining goodness, beauty, and they always end up in a kind of postmodern lack of truth anyway. There's this sort of various dogmas that can't be questioned, even some of the woke ones, like you can be a man in a woman's body. It's very Cartesian modernist assumption, which goes against the whole embodiment field, as far as I can tell, of body mind holism. What's the next one, Helen? What else we got on the list?
Suppression of doubt or dissent.
Right. So there's certain topics in modernist materialist psychology that you just can't touch. So, for example, there's an allergy to anything around tribal identity, which any indigenous people would regard as normal, but because of World War One and World War Two, post World War Two moral consensus, which is the content, the moral kind of mythos of kind of modern materialist modernity, kind of in the last 100 years. Look up Jonathan Peugeot on this, who is excellent. Jonathan Peugeot on this topic, post World War Two consensus. The idea of tribe has become toxic. So if any psychologist starts talking about co-regulation, they talk about it like it's just therapy. But it's not just therapy. It's the fact that the girl in Costa has a similar sense of humor to me when I'm in England. It's the feeling of being on the land in a more pagan sense. It's like when I'm in England, I'm of the land, like particularly when I was on the border with Wales, which is where my name Walsh actually comes from. It was like I'm really of this place, like mystically a spiritual experience. Like we're trying to reduce that to secular mindfulness. And even the mindfulness teachers I now know says, no, we need ritual and we need community. We need a shared coherence. So multiculturalism is another sort of a shared assumption, which is bad for your mental health, right? All the evidence, by the way, shows that kind of say religious people are actually happier, healthier mentally. People in communities that are more coherent have more happiness. Diversity is absolutely not our strength if you look at the data. But someone might hear that and get really upset. Why? Because we're not discussing a topic, we're treading on a taboo. Because if you said to me, no, actually, there's this set of data that shows that companies that are diverse perform better, and there's some evidence of that actually. So you could actually have a conversation about that just from the point of view of the evidence. And even that conversation would still happen within the point of view of the materialist evidence, not my soul sings when I'm in England in a way that it doesn't even when I'm in beautiful Croatia,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Because we're in the conversation of only the objective facts exist. Like you were in psychiatry, and it's like give you a drug. Why? Because the drug is physical, the drug is quick, the drug has an evidence base. You don't talk, psychiatrists generally don't talk about community, which is the thing that actually keeps us sane, right? How do people in England feel now? They feel violated, a lot of people, because their boundaries have been violated against their will nationally all across Western Europe. And yet, as soon as you have this topic, people get that you've hit a taboo, and then people call out the devil because you've sinned. Okay, what is the devil? The devil is Hitler. The devil is you're a Nazi.
Yeah.
Okay. And it's like, well, hang on a minute. I don't like Hitler, but he's not the devil, right? Like I don't agree with things he said 99.9% of the time, but it's probably point it probably said dogs are good. He liked Alsatians, I like Alsatians, right? So it's not clearly the ultimate evil if we both like Alsatians and Alsatians. Dogs are good, by the way. That is a fact. That is objectively true. So cats too, if the cat lovers are out there. Okay, so what's happened is this quite natural hypervigilance developed in modernity. So it was a hypervigilance to the sins of religion from the 30 Years' War, the sins of nationalism from World War One, and the sins of ethno-nationalism in World War Two. And that's very understandable. So I'm not without sympathy for that. I've been to Yad Vashem Holocaust Museum. I'm not without sympathy for the evils of excess in these areas. But Aristotle said every evil is actually on one end of two ends of a spectrum, and what's the healthy
Yeah.
golden mean, right? So is there a healthy nationalism? We can't talk about psychology without talking about that because we're tribal. Okay, is there the key thing that's gone wrong is borders. So if you notice everyone's obsessed with boundaries, like I did that book on people pleasing a few years back, it's always the
Yes.
hashtag boundaries. So what that is individuals trying to do the job of society.
Yes.
Okay, so traditionally, for example, you didn't have to work out exactly what kind of polyamorous weird relationship you were in because it was just given to you. You got married, and this is what it is, and these are the rules. And some people did something different, behind the scenes. Fair enough, there's always variation, but you were basically given the boundaries. These are the moral boundaries, your Ten Commandments. These are the societal boundaries. We don't do that on the train in England. The subtle cultural boundaries as well as the hard moral religious boundaries. And everyone knew the boundaries, and this was implicit. And not everyone totally obeyed them, but they were there. And now we've totally removed the Thomas Sowell was a wonderful African American thinker, talks about the unconstrained vision, which is the sort of liberal in the sense of liberal modernity, again, not in the sense of left leaning, says that we shouldn't have any kind of constraints. I want to do what I want to do. I want to be free. It's very American as well, isn't it? It's very like, no one tells me what to do, Dad. It's very teenage. And the problem with that is it leads to hell because it leads to addiction and it leads to confusion. And everyone's trying to work out their own boundaries individually. And it's very hard without the kind of societal framing of that. So if I say conservative, again, I don't mean right leaning politically. I mean in the most fundamental Taoist sense of, say, yin and yang, meaning boundaries, borders, and also, interestingly, the masculine. So what's happened is masculinity has been pushed into shadow because that was all on the side of the Nazis as the hyper masculine became pathologized, and then we didn't have a sense of the evil of the feminine, the communist evil. We didn't have a sense of toxic femininity. So what's happened is all these conversations you'll see in the media about masculinity and that Netflix show and Andrew Tate, that's all about not understanding healthy masculinity.
Yes.
Thoughts?
Oh, well, there's a lot there, Mark. But
It's
society
huge, isn't
needs
it? It's a huge
structure.
topic.
Yeah, society needs structure. People need structure. People need
Structure,
to,
boundaries, limits.
yeah, yeah. Structure brings boundaries. And there is a flailing around without the structure, without clear boundaries. People don't know where the boundaries exist or or when they're overstepping them, when they're not reaching them, whatever.
Yeah, I mean, flailing, confusion,
Yeah,
addiction, I would add,
yeah,
like for example, 12 step, when I got sober like 19 years ago now, just celebrating, I think 19 years sober this year, it's all about boundaries, it's all about rules and the 12
yeah,
steps and the traditions, it's the 12 steps, the 12 traditions, and it's really rigid in a way. And then, of
yeah,
course, people within it are imperfect and a bit more flexible, and different groups do
yeah,
things in different ways. So it's actually very free in another way because groups are quite anarchistic actually in how they
yeah,
interpret those rules and traditions because you can't tell an alcoholic what to do ever. We're the ultimate teenagers. Like in some ways being an ADHD addict is just being ahead of the curve of modernity, because I feel like everyone's caught up. We've hit the psychological tipping point. We've hit the psychological apocalypse. And the only reason I'm able to be a little bit, I won't go so far as to say wise, though I feel like I've always been clever and I've never been wise. My therapist actually laughed out loud when I asked him if he thought I was clever or wise. Yeah, he said, I didn't mean to laugh, Mark, but we both know you're clever and not wise. But if I've developed any wisdom at all, it's through the hard way of suffering these problems of boundarylessness, in my drinking, drugging, dating life, money life, all these ways. And now I'm kind of realizing, like, oh, there are some integrative truths. And if we look at this developmentally, the problem is the people that are deep in liberal modernity will think we're going back. This is why The Handmaid's Tale is so popular, because this is the great fear of
yes,
the feminine's great fear is sort of rigid control and domination, which is understandable because that has been a thing at times, right?
yeah,
That still is a thing in Islam, for example. That still is a thing in the Middle East, right?
yeah,
So that's the great fear that's expressed. But equally, Fifty Shades of Grey was the best-selling book for women of all time ever, because there is also this like deep longing for some sense of, I'm not saying terrible kink, by the way, but it's sort of time. It's like no one tell me what to do, but please tie me up. So there is also this sort of, I mean, you're laughing because you see what I'm pointing to, right? Like there is this deep
yeah,
long. I saw this
yeah,
great meme this year, which was me 10 years ago. No one tell me what to do. Me this year. Someone please tell me what to do.
yes,
We notice this on the courses. People are so much happier when we say, this is the homework. Do
yes,
this. Not when we give them loads of choice. One of the great holy cows of materialist modernity is choice. More choice is always better. It's not.
no,
When you've raised kids, right? And certainly autistic kids, you know that you definitely don't want to give them loads of choice. You want to be like, do you want A or B, sausages or fish fingers?
yeah,
So some choice, but not infinite choice. Like, and the infinite choice looks like freedom, but is actually just a sort of weird kind of postmodern cage. And I think people realize that now. Like, I don't feel like this is a hard sell. I did a course with my young men yesterday about getting a higher power, which is the sort of AA way into God and faith. And you could say higher power, so there's some degree of like choice and flexibility, because otherwise modern people push back if you go back to some kind of, you have to all be Catholic or Muslim or Hindu, right? So that's kind of a nice compromise. And you know what was really interesting? I just led them through it. I said, look, there's higher power. You need something. If you don't have a higher power at the center of your life, you put yourself at the center of life, and that leads to narcissism, which is another kind of hell. And blah blah. I took them through it and said, look, most people in human history had this. Most outside of the metropolitan liberal elites, most people in the world today still have a higher power, and no atheist culture has lasted more than 100 years. So just like, let's just have some humility here. Which is more likely, Helen? That every culture that lasted more than 100 years in human history ever, including all tribal people, my ancestors, and most of my conservative relatives living in the countryside, they're all just morons. That's possible. Okay. Or maybe materialistic, kind of nihilistic, hedonistic modernity. Maybe we've taken a mistrack and that's why we're all insane and addicted. Which of those two possibilities is more fucking likely, Helen?
yeah, I think we know.
We know. And there's different takes on this. Like your pagan take on it is different than my kind of Catholic influence take on this. Right? Like your more femme take on it is different than my more yang take on this.
Yeah, yeah,
But we're both traditionalists in that sense. I think people are deep down, right? Like when I was like super promiscuous, like even my most liberal friends would go, you know what, Mark, this doesn't feel right. Something's off here. Like there's a moral in, even though they couldn't articulate why, because I was like, well, it's consent and it's all adults and we're not doing anything illegal. And but they kind of there was a moral interest. It's the same as when we see beauty. You don't have to be religious when you go into a church to go, okay, there's something beautiful here. or in the landscape of Slovenia, the big church, I call it, the pagan church, right? There's something beautiful here.
Yeah.
I think we're continuously called back to sanity. And because the modern world has hit rock bottom, they'd say in AA, I feel like it's not a hard sell. And I don't think sort of secular mindfulness and yoga are going to cut it. I think everyone's just laughing at the narcissism of sort of Bali spirituality, the sort of pick and mix narcissistic Bali spirit. Not to pick on Bali, but those kind of places is usually where it's at. It's the same in the crystal shop in Glastonbury. Do you know what I mean? I love a good crystal. I know you do, but without some kind of structure around it, we're just, it's playing, isn't it? That Helen for podcast listeners, hold it. What is that? A nice amethyst or?
It is, yes.
That's nice as well. I like a nice crystal. I'm guessing though you've got a bit of structure around your paganism. You're probably not just making it up yourself. Is that fair to say? It's
Absolutely,
not just
yeah.
Helen's way.
It's not just Helen's way.
Why
And
would we?
actually,
Go on.
paganism is rising in the
Oh, huge.
UK
Christianity
hugely.
and paganism are
Yeah,
both. The young men are all going back to church,
yeah,
orthodoxy. One of our colleagues is Orthodox, and that's huge. Catholicism is making a big comeback. Obviously, here in Croatia, everyone's in church anyway. They don't give a shit.
yeah,
They're not so decadent in Eastern Europe. It's funny. You walk down the street in Slovenia, you're like, oh, this is nice. It's almost like religion and traditional family values and ethnic homogeneity. It's almost like those things are really nice. It's like we leave our door unlocked in Croatia, and my English friends can't imagine that. So it's from the level of the psychological right down to like crime, right down to aesthetics, like Ljubljana and Zagreb, beautiful cities, and they're still modern. They're not like some countries are actually, I'd say, probably too right leaning, like Hungary or whatever.
yeah,
Like, Zagreb's still funky and cool and full of artists, and it doesn't have to be like again, we're not like, oh my God, the Middle Ages, which again is mostly a lie if you look up how the Middle Ages actually were in some great YouTube channels on this now. There's a sort of Enlightenment lie about how everyone was eating Monty Python, living in the dirt and eating turnips, even though people had more holidays than us, probably reported more happiness than us. I bet their love lives were better than ours. Their communities were definitely better than ours. They definitely had more meaning than us. But we're like, oh, poor them. They had to eat turnips, and it's like, not really, but okay. So there's a definite propaganda that we've been facing there. But yeah, paganism is also on the rise, isn't it? I think as people, there's a re-enchantment going on.
yes.
And
That's a
what
beautiful description of it, actually, a lovely word for it.
Yeah, not my term. Others have also talked about, Paul Kingsnorth talks about the machine as the opposite of
Yeah,
that. People have become brutalized by the machine. And what they want and what is happening is a re-enchantment. And I think the thing I'm going to be most involved with, I think, in the coming years, is the re-enchantment of psychology and coaching. And embodiment naturally has this, but it's like I'm starting saying I'm not sure I'm just an embodiment teacher anymore, because embodiment's the heart of it. Because you go, hang on a minute, we're embodied. We're not just minds in a meat taxi. We're not minds in a machine. This is a ridiculous point of view. We're embodied, the embodied person. It's holistic, and there's consciousness in throughout our body. But then you start going, but what about the world? What about community? What about divinity? That embodiment happens in a context. If people have seen the tetrarchy model I'm always pushing. The center of that is actually spirit. It's not embodiment, actually. So embodiment's a sort of very tangible way in. But if we take that to its conclusion, we see that there's a re-enchantment of the world. Yeah, Jonathan Peugeot's excellent on this. There's another Orthodox philosopher on YouTube called Zachary Porcu, Porcu, American guy who's very good on where the history here. This comes from a history, and it reveals the cult we're in. So that's the first thing, revealing the cult of modernity. Its assumptions about materiality, its sacredness, its taboos. It's things we're not. So what I know is going to trigger people. It's not just because I like triggering people, Helen, though that is part of my sacred mission on the earth. We all have to know our role, and that part of the jester's role is triggering. Jokes are funny because they're about taboos, and
yes,
that's part of that's why jokes in America are all about race because that's a big taboo. Toilet humor amongst kids because that's a taboo amongst kids. So we're revealing the taboos, we're revealing the sins, and we're getting to the point where the sort of hidden assumptions are causing so many problems they're no longer hidden. And that re-enchantment, that reintegration of traditional values, which I always joke is we're talking about space Mormons here, right? Or neo, or becoming kind of space Amish. Yeah, because we're not going back because you can't go back because things always develop and advance. By the way, that's a Christian mythos. Everything is developing, progress again. But there is some truth in that we evolve upwards, and we need to reintegrate the things that were thrown out in the Enlightenment, and particularly in since World War II. And the healthy reintegrating of the masculine, of borders, of enchantment. It sounds like I'm throwing a bunch of things together, but if you really look into the history of the Enlightenment and the World War II consensus, you'll see how these all relate. And these are a lot of the sort of hot button topics for a while. I think, now this is controversial, but I think the breaking point was trans, particularly around trans kids, because essentially the borders have been getting pushed back and back, and then they hit the body. And then we say, not even the body matters. I am a mind totally independent of the body. And at that point, people push back because it started to seem unsustainable. And this isn't to say we should be mean to anyone. We can, be kind to people that suffer and have identity issues. Um, but I think it hit a limit of common sense where people said, no, 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 there can't be 700 genders. You can't just identify as anything you want. We can't just say the mind is all there is. The body matters here. I am incarnate, I am embodied, and that matters. And that's not just a vehicle that can be cut up, literally cut up. I think particularly when that was applied to children, a lot of listeners hit a breaking point. It's interestingly, the change I've seen in culture is that young men were getting this a year or two ago, because young men are often the most radical fringe, and they're the ones they're disenfranchised because they've got no money and they've got no girlfriend, and everyone tells them they're bad because they're masculine, blah blah blah. But what's really interesting in the last year is I've seen women get on board with this. There's lots of groups of women who are anti-mass migration, for example. And I've seen women often have a quite like have this sensitivity for the cultural trend, and I think particularly when children were threatened, women just had enough of it. And it was pushed to a limit where people realized, oh, you don't really speak for me on these topics. I know this is going to be quite triggering for some people. And again, we're not, this is, you have to understand why, that this is to do with the sacredness of difference. So this is essentially, I have this thesis, we're all Christian, but some of us are doing it badly. So we're all, anyone in the West is prone to sort of Christian psychological substructures. So, for example, human rights have a Christian psychological substructure. Now, human rights don't have a reason for it, but there is if you're Christian, right? It's a sort of secular version of it. A lot of the stuff in the Enlightenment was actually sort of recycling Christian notions, but without a kind of a theistic reason. You see Sam Harris always attempting to do this. He's always trying to say, yes, but I really want to be Western and Christian, but I don't really have a good reason for it. So it's not very logical. Anyway, so the thing in the Christian message that is in our culture is the sacredness of the other, or let's say it was like tolerance for the other. So the sort of basic message of Christianity. So Jesus was in this incredibly orthodox, religious, fundamentalist environments where you stone people to death for, doing something on the Sabbath. And you'll still see that if you go to like Orthodox Jewish communities. I've been in those communities, and there's a beauty to it, but there's also a horror to it in the strictness of it. And he said, look, maybe make an exception. And it's okay if you're a Samaritan, which is basically like another kind of Jew. It's not even that different. And it's, we shouldn't commit adultery, but if someone does, maybe don't throw the first stone, because we're all human and none of us are perfect. Yeah. So welcome the outsider, welcome the tax collector and the prostitute and all those kind of things. But what he didn't say was be the prostitute with 17 genders who's also a tax collector. And what happened was this kind of healthy offsetting of too much boundary, too much masculinity, too much orthodoxy kind of went through culture and has now become a substitute religion where the other is not just sort of tolerated, or the exception is kind of, oh, it's interesting, or that's different. Okay, you're gay, that's fine, no worries, it's a bit different, but whatever. Instead of that, it's become kind of sacralized. So it's the sort of sacred refugee, yeah, instead of welcome the foreigner, which is the original message. It's become the sacred other, the sacred exception. And what you'll see in this kind of postmodern breakdown is always the exception. But yeah, but what about this unusual group who have this unusual thing? And you're like, no, 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 that's fine. We don't want to be mean to them, but let's start reorientating to the majority as opposed to the minority. Like most people are either male or female. Just most people are. They're male or female, very clearly. And there might be some unusual cultural exceptions and people that are born with different genitalia or whatever. But they're a fringe case. They're fringe people. And we could be kind to them, but they're fringe. So that this sort of orientation to the margins and the exception eventually makes everyone crazy because then you start saying, well, there are no categories. There is no men and women. That's all subjective. And that ultimately leads to the breakdown even of the body, where you say, you know what, the body doesn't matter at all. So not only are there no distinctions in society, but even the physical distinctions. And then the postmodern, the final thing is there's no truth, which is the ultimate destruction that we're going to see in postmodernity, which is just not feasible because I don't know, gravity goes down and bread tastes, you know, you need a certain amount of calories to survive, and there's facts in the world. So that's the condition of sort of confusion of something's called postmodernity. I call it late modernity, and I go, okay, what psychology's been trying to integrate that, but it hasn't been really working, and it's led to a very odd kind of psychology. You see that in the trauma world, for example. Everyone's
Yes.
obsessed with things, and it's very, very sensitive, very, very subjective. It has this kind of neo-Marxist element, and and like for example, when I was doing a project in Ukraine, that just stuff just isn't sustainable when there's real issues at work. Like in Ukraine, then it's like, yeah, but how do we heal trauma? Right? It's just very, very clear and obvious. I mean, I've said a lot there, Helen. Do you want anything you want to reply to any of that?
There's an awful lot there, and of course, there's nuance in various parts of that, and not all of my views align completely with yours, as you
No,
know,
which is okay.
which is fine. It's good to have that discussion and exploration, but the the bigger societal issues are crucial to look at. It's so important to look at, because we are seeing so many problems. I love the UK. I love living in the UK, but we are seeing an erosion of society. We're seeing things disintegrate.
Yeah, what you have is a sort of kind of anarcho tyranny, because the more things break down, the more governments have to control everything with
Yeah.
surveillance, kind of surveillance and authoritarian. And it was several thousand people arrested for social media. I may have actually
Yeah.
broken British law in this podcast, literally just by speaking. And
Mm.
I've had friends from YouTube who are arrested for very mainstream views, literally even jailed, or had their ability to speak freely taken away. So, I mean, it's quite serious in terms of some of the civil liberties issues, kind of freedom of
Yeah.
speech and things like that. The less you have a cohesive society that polices itself, the more it has to be policed by government. And unfortunately, some of the technology now available makes that sort of terrifyingly dystopian. I find the UK increasingly dystopian. By comparison, I know there's still islands of goodness. We went to Swindon, and my girlfriend now calls it the worst place in the world. So if anyone's listening to Swindon, there's sort of drug addicts on every street, and London was its own kind of decadent hedonistic dystopia when I was there. But there's still beautiful islands. Like we enjoyed St Ives, and we enjoyed Ely when we were there in Cambridgeshire. And I know in the north there's still places that function relatively humanely. Some
Yeah,
of my
yeah.
northern friends are like, don't cast aspersions on us.
And I left a note on the doorstep saying, "Dear postman, leave parcels on the doorstep. I'm in a meeting." So, I did. They
Yeah,
don't.
yeah, there's still places where you have that. I mean, you wouldn't do that in any major city in Northern Europe.
No.
I was teaching in Amsterdam. There was literally golden calves in my hotel when I was there.
Yes.
I don't think they understand the symbolism of golden calves in the hotels. In every
Yeah.
room had a golden calf in it. There was this weird satanic artwork in the lift. They didn't understand the symbolism. They just thought it was cool and edgy, or But it's like there is a sort of infiltration through the culture of some very unwholesome trends. And I think,
Yeah.
these are um, coming to conclusion, and the sort of the possibility of toxic femininity, the limits of a world without masculine boundaries, the reintegration of traditionalism. These things are all coming to the fore. This isn't just Mark's theories. There's many other people talking about this. People could come to my courses and still do a body coaching course, and they don't have to agree with all this politics. And I'm not going to
Yeah.
start ranting about these issues when I'm teaching coaching skills. So some of this is my own views, and not all the teachers that work with us agree with all these things. I think the majority of people in the company have started to realize that there's some unhealthy tendencies. And I think a lot of people have been kept scared and silenced for a long time, basically threatened by the sort of most extreme edge of people that represent the most extreme mentally unhinged elements of sort of wokeism, which is the kind of most extreme edge of kind of liberal modernity in many ways. I think people have sort of had enough of that, really.
And it's important to be able to explore and discuss and know what your own views are. That matters.
And this is how you know whether you're dealing with a cult or whether you're dealing with reasonable people.
Yeah.
because reasonable people will discuss things. They'll say it's okay to have different views, diversity of opinion. Whereas when you're dealing with a cult, they'll just call you names. They'll say
Yes.
you're a racist, you're a sexist, you're a...
Yeah.
essentially what they're really saying is you're a sinner in
Yeah.
their cult. And I just say, well, I'm not in that religion, but thank you. I'd say
Yes.
that's your religion. Just as like, if a Jewish guy or a Muslim guy come up to me and said, you shouldn't eat bacon, I'd say, well, no, that's your religion and you're welcome not to eat bacon, but I'm not in your religion, so I'm going to enjoy this butty. Thank you very much.
Yes.
Like that's his religion, not mine. So I think that's the point people are at now, where they're sort of saying, you know what, I'm not a member of this cult. And if people are, they can shout and scream and insult you. But that's pretty much all they do. And you sort of know you've already won the argument when they
Yeah.
start insulting you and shouting and screaming and or applying power like the British government or trying to get you cancelled through the ICF or cancelled on social media. Well, that's just an application of power because they know
Yeah.
the arguments aren't very reasonable. So yeah, anyway, this the sort of I'm exploring what that looks like. I don't yet know myself. I do know we need to bring meaning back in. We need to bring community back in. I think individualistic materialist psychology with, Instagram mindfulness hacks is not going to cut it given the psychological state we're in. So on the one hand, it's like I'm declaring the psychological apocalypse and saying we're all in hell, which is like ouch. But on the other hand, this is tremendously good news because it's like saying, it's like someone who crawls into AA and says, I've hit rock bottom. I've had enough. I've got step one, you declare that you're powerless and you have a problem. I feel like I'm doing step one for the psychology world here, and it's kind of like, okay, let's go to step two now. Like, it's really hopeful. And also, the kids are getting it, man. The kids are great. There's so many great thinkers out there. I've mentioned Jonathan Peugeot or Zachary or Paul Kingsnorth. From the female fronts, two of my favorite thinkers are posh British women. I love posh British women. Not going to lie, Helen. Louise Perry and Mary Harrington, and both very compassionate, feminine. Particularly Louise, very feminine, like people that are just minds like far cleverer than me. Far clever. But it's also like, integrating, for example, this year I discovered John Paul II's theology of the body, which is a whole embodiment masterpiece. And I was like, I am also astounded by the irony here. I'm also like I was just, bear in mind my mum was a Catholic nun, right? But I had that background and I was like rejected it and became kind of, hedonistic and then Buddhist and all, got a lot from Buddhism and all these things, got a lot from them. But the irony for me of coming back to like reading John Paul II and going, oh my God, this is genius. This is absolute embodiment genius. And I it was under my nose the whole time. It's like the Alchemist, you know that story, Paulo
Yes.
Coelho, Paul,
Yes.
where he kind of goes around the world and he goes to the opposite side of the world and so it says, "Where's the treasure?" And he's on the other side of the world. He says, "Oh, it's buried underneath where you came from." And he goes back home and it was underneath the hillside he was sitting on right at the beginning of the story. I feel like that is the nostos in Odysseus. The Greek word nostos means homecoming. That's the nostos for me personally. But without being too grandiose, I feel like I have a way of sort of tuning into the zeitgeist. There's a certain nostos, coming home to the body we always talk about, but it's also coming home to the culture, not hating your own culture. It's also coming home to the land, hopefully, if I, can get a visa, there's practical issues for me with an Italian girlfriend, and coming home to spirituality. Like what is spirituality if not coming home to that which is ultimately good, true, and beautiful? And I think psychology needs a nostos. It needs it. We've had the Trojan Wars long enough. The Trojan culture wars have been vicious, and it's time we sailed home. And there's going to be some adventures on the way home. We're going to go to the island of the Lotus Eaters. We're going to have some crazy one-eyed cyclopses to deal with, and a few things along the way. But I think that we've sort of set sail now, whether we like it or not. The Nostos is happening. We're on Odysseus's ship, and we may need to tie ourselves so the sirens don't pull us into the social media addiction of it. This is so classical. Hello, I feel so classy describing it this way.
It's
Um,
beautiful.
it's quite nice, isn't it? I feel quite
Mm.
inspired about it. I just did a post for Christmas. People didn't see it on Instagram about why Christianity is embodied. And I'm sure Helen could do one on paganism. Clearly, can make a case for that as well. But yeah, people are going to see this radical side gradually come out on social media. I don't want to freak everyone out too much. I'm still the same kind of Mark. And people can still come to Keck and get just an embodiment coach training and not be subject to my rantings about Ulysses on that. It's very much more practical. I think my mentees might get subject to it this year, Helen. I think we're going to do some optional extra classes on a different day of the week. So
Nice.
they'll be asking me about niching their coaching brand, and I'll be talking to them about the theology of the body. So we should probably offer it separately, shouldn't we?
Yeah,
Yeah, so
yeah.
resources, the book, How to Become Human, Guide for Young Men, totally radical, probably going to get me arrested at Heathrow one day, but worth a read if you've got young men in your life and you don't want Andrew Tate influencing them by that. Uh, the Body and Training Coaching and Embodiment Toolkit, if you too cheap for any of our courses, very affordable, structured, not just rantings from the podcast. Instagram, you'll increasingly see some of these new angles. YouTube, two channels: the Mark Walsh channel for young men and Embodiment Unlimited if you want to see like embodiment coaching in action. You know what I'm really proud of is we punch above our weight with what we put out. Alan. We put out
Yeah.
so much good stuff, so much good stuff. And then I said to the young guys I was teaching last night, I want all listeners who've ever studied with me to hear this. Like, thank you so much for letting me do what I do, or letting all of us do what we do. Not only are you sort of keeping a Hungarian single mum in employment who does my emails and, the little victories of just surviving in the economic context we're in, but also like I do what I love. I do what I love. I get to interview cool people. I get to work with adorable people like you, Helen, who bring out the best in me. And like I was saying to the young men, I'm like, you're my motivation for going to the gym and having cold showers because I don't want to be a hypocrite. I don't like it's my motivation for taking care of myself. I always we're always on the verge of going bankrupt, right? Because it's not an easy industry. And I always think if it ended tomorrow, I would have had 20 years of not working at Tesco. I would have had 20 years of not having to work in some shitty office like with Ricky Gervais as my boss, right? Like that, what a win. Like what a touch, like what a win. If AI destroys that, if I finally get arrested or cancelled, it's been a wild ride this year. I think surviving all the summits coming up now, if people want to kind of like taste live of what we do, Keck is still signing up if people want to train in it. Anything else we should be plugging, Helen? Facilitators in Flow, if you're kind of struggling a bit personally, you want a bit of support. Anything we
And
want
the
to plug?
Embodiment Festival.
The festival in January is the big one, right? So we've
Yeah.
got various guest speakers at that, sessions for coaches, simple sort of beginners sessions. Should I do a hardcore session? Should I do a session on the psychological apocalypse? What do you
Oh,
reckon?
I think so,
Think I
yes.
should do one. I should do one
Yeah.
on the side. Sort of, we should. You should be there to keep me in line. You're the brakes to my inner Kanye accelerator. So for the balance of the universe, I think you should supervise that one, Helen.
Okay.
Good. Anything else this year? I mean, we're thanking the whole team. Virginia in customer service is always our biggest fan. The Keck team for supporting us, done a great job, and I just don't want to miss anyone out. Our social media people, unsung editors like Chanel and Swapnil behind the scenes, doing little bits of editing and putting a bit of earth to my air. Anyone else we need to thank, or anything else that happened that we should announce? Live events, didn't talk about those. Oh, there's going to be in-person intensives in the UK and in Slovenia. Not so I might do Berlin as well. I thought, where could I really fuck with people, Helen? Where's going to be the test of this stuff around post-progressivism, we could call it? Where's this stuff, the death of the cult of modernity? I thought, where's the worst place? And I'm not going to go to Portland because I don't hate myself. But I thought Berlin. So I might do one workshop in Berlin, and then we're going to do a live-in like residential in Kent, which is just out. It's a green area just outside of the hellscape of London, so people can get to it really easily. But that's going to be residential because I really miss that like in-person embodied work. And we never make any money from it, but they're really juicy, so people can look up the lives. If you're like, oh, I don't want to do an online course. I mean, our online courses are probably more people find them less annoying than the average Zoom course. I know that they're more involved, more interactive, so there's less fatigue. I wonder
Lots of
what Zoom
community.
fatigue is really basically like. It's something like consumer fatigue, right? It's not really about the Zoom. It's partly about that, but anyway. So yeah, the in-person stuff. I think that's all the things: books, social media, in person. Is that everything? Have we done
Yeah.
everything?
Fasten your
What
seatbelts.
what are your final thoughts for the year? Like, phew, we made it. We survived financially. We didn't burn out this year. We're both in relatively good condition and health.
Yeah, but it's been such a ride. It's been a wonderful ride, hasn't it? It's been magical.
Another, see, re-enchantment. There we go. You love
Yeah.
re-enchantment. You're a magical forest pixie, Helen. Okay, I adore you, Helen. Thank you to all our listeners. Big shout out to everyone. So have a wonderful. What year are we in? I feel like last I checked my watch, it was like 2010 or something. We're 2026, isn't it?
Yep.
2026. Oh my God. Okay. Happy New Year, everyone.